My name is Sally Smith, and I'm sharing my doctoral scholarly project as part of my Doctor of Nursing Practice Family Nurse Practitioner Program curriculum. My scholarly project focused on improving rates of tuberculosis, or TB, contact investigations. The chair for my DNP project is Dr. Snell. Ruth Ann Garadia is my colleague in the TB world and served as my community member for my project. As tuberculosis is a fairly complex disease, the world of TB is specialized. A review of TB and what contact investigations, or CIs, are is necessary before delving into the details of this project. Active tuberculosis disease, or TBD, is a communicable disease transmitted from one person's expired pulmonary droplets to another person breathing those droplets into their lungs. Approximately 1.5 million people die each year worldwide out of 10 million cases. Contact investigations are part of the care for all individuals with active TB disease, called index cases. CIs are carried out to identify individuals that have been exposed to someone with active TB disease, to uncover anyone with TB disease or latent TB infection, which is called LTBI. The goal of identifying individuals is to bring them to completed treatment. CIs involve two testing timeframes. The first testing is completed immediately upon recognizing someone as being exposed, and then repeat testing, considered post-exposure testing, is completed 8 to 10 weeks after their last contact with an infectious individual. A CI is considered complete only if an individual completes post-exposure testing. By treating individuals, public health departments prevent the spread of disease. Preventing the spread of communicable diseases is a priority for public health departments, and TB is one of those priorities to address. Each year, data is submitted to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or the CDC, in the form of an aggregate report called an ARPI that lays out the CI data. Information reported is the number of active cases and the number of active cases that CIs were completed on, the total number of contacts identified, how many were completely evaluated, if LTBI or active TB disease was identified, how many started treatment, and how many completed treatment. This information directly identifies the ability of a program to prevent transmission and is then used to evaluate that program's ability. CIs are conducted by registered nurses within the state's TB program. CIs do contribute to the workload for RNs as they are time-consuming, and complexities vary based on each individual index case and each contact's needs. CIs were identified as an area of needed improvement, as CI completion rates prior to the intervention were identified at 63%, which is below the benchmark established by the Division of TB Elimination. First round, or initial testing and evaluation, was at 89%. The drop in completion rates between 89% initially to 63% for post-exposure testing and complete evaluation was theoretically believed to be related to nurse workload and decreased client follow-up, noted as lost to follow-up. The project's intervention sought to decrease RN workload by streamlining workflow processes and improving knowledge through the use of a modified job task aid and data collection tool. By decreasing RN workload, client outcomes would improve, as evidenced by improved completion rates of CIs. Improved rates mean decreased opportunity for transmission in the community. By streamlining workflow processes that add in scheduling clients for post-exposure testing in advance, the goal was to add in practices that decrease the risk of clients being lost to follow-up with decreased communication and not being scheduled. Drop-down boxes with available possible options were added to build knowledge. Boxes with task reminders were added to build workflow and knowledge. Making the form fillable added ease of use. The project sought to increase knowledge and decrease work burden of RNs to improve client outcomes. Improved completion rates reflect program effectiveness. The project's intervention stood to improve client outcomes, the nursing profession, and the TB program itself. A literature review was conducted to answer the question, how does a streamlined nursing workflow and improved job aid and data collection tool for tuberculosis contact investigations affect the rate of completed evaluations compared to current practice? The guidelines for TB-CIs were last updated in 2005. Testing timeframes are based on TB transmission, disease progression, and testing abilities, and none of this knowledge or ability for testing has changed. Disease progression and the body's response to transmission determine the need for 2 testing timeframes. TB progresses slowly in adults, and it can take 8 to 10 weeks for the body to complete an inflammatory process and test positive on lab tests. As this information has not changed, the guidelines have not really required any updates. Each state TB program determines their tools and processes to get their CIs completed, and each program is responsible for identifying areas of needed improvement and then developing, implementing, and evaluating their own quality improvement. Because of these 2 factors, literature is limited and there is no standardized tool to implement or evaluate changes or improvements. The literature review focused on nursing interventions, generalized processes, and synonyms for processes. For example, care pathways, clinical decision job aids, and tools were keywords for job aids. Keywords focused on nurse, data collection, client outcomes, work burden, and did not focus on keeping tuberculosis as the subject limiter. 24 total articles were selected and critically appraised, with 11 being applicable to supporting the project. So themes grew from the 11 articles that were critically appraised, including tools, workflows, decision support, and supported nurse outcomes. Tuberculosis as its own theme was incorporated later. Tools and workflows were used to connect both task demand and work burden of RNs to client outcomes, and develop support for the use of a modified tool to decrease work burden, affect workflows, improve reporting, and improve completion rates. Decision support was the keyword to represent job aid and task reminders on the modified form, which were added as drop-down boxes and boxes to check with task completion. Tools that provided decision support and considered scheduling increased efficiency, and scheduling improvements decreased time spent on decisions, so both combined decreased task burden. Supporting nurses by decreasing work burden with streamlined workflows, decision support or task reminders, and improved job aid and data collection tools improved client outcomes. The literature review was strong in its ability to support the planned interventions and project. Weaknesses of the literature were related more to the collection of data when self-reported by participants, and therefore can be affected by the perception of the participants' experience or what they believe their response should be. The greatest gap and limitation with the literature review was related to the lack of TB-specific information. The project's theoretical framework followed Lewin's change theory, as it is effective for complex quality improvement. The project is complex, as the interventions attempted to decrease work burden and improve knowledge of RNs, while simultaneously incorporating a workflow change that all combined sought to improve completed CI rates and improve client outcomes. During the freezing phase, the project was identified and interventions focused on increasing awareness. This phase corresponds with the engagement session completed outside the intervention period as part of the program's initiatives that provided an overview of CIs. Changing occurred during the implementation phase over a 12-week period where the modified job aid and data collection tool was implemented. An engagement session was held and recorded for asynchronous attendance and future access that reviewed the interventional tool and the workflow process changes. The form was sent out via email by the CI data collection TB nurse consultant to RNs when they received a new active TB disease index case client. Refreezing occurred after completion of the intervention period, where the modified tool is the standard tool of use, and quality improvements continue based on feedback. The project currently remains in the refreezing state, while the project intervention has now become the new normal, but will soon enter the freezing stage. This slide shows the project timeline. The planning phase involved identification of the need for the project, collaboration with the TB program manager, medical director, and the chief nursing officer for the entire State Department of Health. The D&P project proposal was completed during this phase, along with the writing of Chapter 1. This chapter included the phenomenon of interest, the purpose, aims, background, significance, and support for the project. Project design included research for the project and the literature review, making the modifications to the existing data collection tool, and obtaining chair and program and project site approval, and also included the writing of Chapter 2 that outlined the integration and synthesis of the literature. Application for IRB approval from Maryville University and the project site followed. Chapter 3 followed along with pre-planned engagement sessions, development of the data collection instrument, and ongoing collaboration with the project and program site team. The implementation period was carried out over 12 weeks, in which data was collected and reviewed ongoing. The results phase included data compilation and analysis and the writing of Chapter 4 of the DNP project. The project was identified as a quality improvement initiative with a pre-post intervention design. The z-test was determined to be the best statistical test to determine the difference between two proportions using nominal data. The proportion is built from the number of completed evaluations out of the total number of identified contacts of the populations that were pre-intervention versus those that received the intervention and considered post-intervention. The instrument used for the intervention is also the method that project data is collected with. Data was submitted via encrypted email and de-identified for the project. Because the project was identified as quality improvement, the student as researcher accessed information as part of the deployment, and the data for the project was de-identified. It was determined to be exempt from IRB requirements for both the university and the project site, which was a State Department of Health's TB program. The project was implemented over a 12-week period after an engagement session as part of the TB program's plan served to increase awareness of CIs. This presentation was part of a pre-planned session for World TB Day. At the start of the intervention period, use of the data collection and job aid tool was reviewed and the workflow process changes were introduced. This again was an engagement session that was recorded for asynchronous use. Data collection occurred during the intervention period, with each submission of the form from the RN case manager via encrypted email. The form was reviewed for contact information to evaluate the number of completed evaluations out of the total number of contacts identified to collect completion data. The form was also reviewed for use of the form itself to determine if the drop-down boxes and checklists were used. The EHR was reviewed to determine if the contacts had been scheduled in advance for their post-exposure testing or if FYI alerts for their next testing needs were added. The created data collection spreadsheet had sections to record all of this information. Only registered nurses that complete CIs and care for clients with active TB disease were included in receiving the intervention or that submitted data. RNs within the Department of Health are required to have at least 3 years of experience as an RN. There was no other disqualifying criteria. Nurses self-identify as both male and female, were in age ranges from 30 to 50 years old, and were both Hispanic and Caucasian. Any active pulmonary tuberculosis disease index case contact investigation was included in the intervention and data collection. During the 12-week intervention period, 3 new active TB disease index cases were identified that were eligible for contact investigation completion. Of these 5 index cases, 3 had contact investigations completed. The de-identified data as a proportion was entered on an Excel spreadsheet and analyzed using SPSS using the z-test statistic. Degree of variability was expected as all contact investigations are unique to both the specificity of the index case client, each contact's individual needs, and the registered nurse's workflows and processes. Additional factors for the project that were considered include the non-mandatory nature of the intervention, the small sample size of 121, and time as a variable and barrier. Attendance to the engagement sessions, use of the workflow that included advanced scheduling for clients and adding for your information or FYI alerts to the EHR charts, and use of the form for a job task aid were all optional. Time as a variable and barrier will be discussed in greater detail later in the presentation. The z-test statistic was negative 5.054, which indicates that there was a statistically significant difference between the two proportions. The difference between the proportions, also called the effect size, was negative 0.384, with the standard error of this difference equal to 0.72. This small effect size indicates a weak relationship between the intervention and the completion of CIs. This means that while there was a difference, it had nothing to do with the intervention. This finding is accurate, related to the confidence interval of 95%, and also validated with the knowledge that the intervention was not used, so its impact cannot be determined. The graph on this slide clearly shows the results of the project. The blue columns are the total number of identified contacts pre and post-intervention. The red columns are the number of identified contacts that were fully evaluated. There is clearly a difference in the two populations' proportions. There were more contacts identified, with fewer evaluated in the population that received the intervention. Pre-intervention completion rates were 66%, and post-intervention contacts were evaluated at a rate of 27%. Prior to the intervention, 42 out of 64 contacts were fully evaluated from 5 index case contacts investigations. During the intervention, 33 out of 121 identified contacts were fully evaluated from 3 index case contact investigations. Based on these findings and the statistical analysis, the null hypothesis of the project was not rejected. Time itself was a limitation to the ability of the project's intervention to create impact. CIs take a minimum of 10 weeks if everything goes exactly as planned, all the contacts cease contact with the index case, and post-exposure testing can be completed exactly 8 to 10 weeks after contact was stopped. But the standard time frame increases for contacts that remain in continuous contact with the index case, and this is because they cannot complete post-exposure testing until the index case is no longer infectious and their contact stopped. The end of an infectious period is a complex decision to make and depends on an index case's smear and culture results, their symptoms, treatment, and radiological findings. The 12-week time frame did not allow for contact investigations to be completed and included. In addition, typically, cases of TB increase as the year progresses. The interventional period carried out January through March results in a lower number of available index cases and CIs. Use of the form and adherence to the workflow and scheduling chain processes was optional and voluntary, and 12 weeks was a short time frame to have registered nurses learn and apply new processes. The drop-down boxes were used inconsistently, the job aid task reminder was not used, and clients were not scheduled in advance for their post-exposure testing. Essentially, the form was only used for data collection and submission. This lack of use, without mandatory processes, indicates a lack of RN buy-in. The suggested sample size was 154, but the interventional number of contacts was 121. This small sample size resulted in a low study power. The low study power and small effect size indicate that the study was not well equipped to determine the effect on the intervention, and that the difference in the population proportions were not the result of the intervention. Because the workflow process was not used and the form was only used to submit data, the question posed by the project remains unanswered. No advanced scheduling occurred, FYI alerts were not added to the EHR, drop-down boxes were used inconsistently, and the checklist was not used to guide tasks. One RN even submitted data using the previous version of the form. Any difference between pre- and post-intervention group completion rates was unrelated to the intervention. Project plans span the TB program, RNs, clients, and the community. Increased awareness at the program level translates to continued evaluation of TB cohort processes that relate to CIs, communication with other state TB programs for feedback and evaluation of their program forms, continued education and engagement with RNs, development and facilitation of a focus group for CIs. The plan is to attempt to increase RN buy-in. The thought is that if the RNs are involved in creating CI processes, the processes will be easier to adhere to. A focus group will be developed to seek feedback, input, and requests from RNs that complete CIs. This will be voluntary involvement as well. Engagement sessions and education in person will be increased. Surveys for feedback will be sent to all RNs that complete CIs to evaluate changes brought about from focus group feedback. By continuing quality improvements, clients are impacted positively with increased completion rates and decreased TB transmission across the community. The project itself, while not effective in changing TB-CI completion rates, had far-reaching impact. Because of the project increasing CI awareness, a 5-year evaluation plan focusing on CI improvement has been implemented by the program that is submitted to the CDC. This includes plans for in-person educational opportunities, improvements and changes in the CI portion of TB cohort, and ongoing modifications and improvements based on RN feedback to the data collection and job aid tool. The project and my DNP education journey has made lasting impacts on both my professional and personal growth. My knowledge of nursing leadership, technical skills, communication, and presentation of information have been drastically improved. My ability to research, synthesize information, evaluate findings, and share the information has developed from a previous complete inability. When I started the program, taking information and data and presenting it or writing at a doctorate level seemed daunting. My perspective has shifted professionally from that of one of the nurses receiving an intervention to the doctoral level prepared individual identifying where change can improve quality, carrying out the intervention, being able to determine the significance of findings, and then sharing those findings professionally. My entire person has been affected and transformed by my experience in this program. The length and intensity of the program create a unique challenge that forced me to learn effective time management and attempt to incorporate joy alongside the doctorate curriculum, the FNP curriculum, my job, and being a matriarch, formerly known as a single mother. My co-occurring life challenges included significant health declines and the escape and emergence from an incredibly dangerous domestic violence relationship that involved a strategic move across the country during the program. The bridges I crossed on that journey across the country are symbolic of the challenges I faced academically and personally. With every bridge I crossed, I believed a little more that I might make it, that I might have a chance. My growth, my freedom, and what I endured prior to and by those efforts corresponds with this program. I didn't speak of it and didn't ask for any accommodation except one, to delay an exam related to a planned court appearance for trial, and even then I took the exam in the allotted time without extension. It was as if I did the program without accommodation. My win was bigger, or I wasn't one of those victims. I am, however, one of those victims and a survivor, and the stigma must stop, so I'm using my presentation to speak out and share. Yes, the two go together. I was abused and escaping that abuse during my curriculum. In 703, I was being strangled. In 704, my son and I were beaten and I filed for a restraining order and endured ongoing stalking. In 708, I was working 2 jobs, raising my child, being stalked, enduring ongoing court proceeding communications and depositions, and working my curriculum for my FNP. In 709, I moved across the country and didn't skip a beat. In 705, I was finally awarded an 18-month restraining order for my abuser finally signing a plea agreement for aggravated stalking in exchange for dropping the charges of bribery and intimidation. I am fighting the created sense of embarrassment to increase awareness. Victims and survivors of domestic violence never fit the societal created image. It is fear of fitting into that stigma, along with so much other conditioning that keeps us quiet. It was me. I was the 1 in 3, the uninspected but typical presentation of an abused woman that is dedicated, hardworking, intelligent, ambitious, and will do it all while managing so much more. I hope by sharing with others in this presentation that awareness increases and acceptance of the violence decreases. I separated it, but my journeys were simultaneous. The moments of joy I shared with my youngest child. Along this journey, combined with my own personal life moments of victory, while the program reached in and transformed my entire brain. The metamorphosis is unexplainable. I am forever grateful for the experience and the opportunities I will have to use my learned critical thinking and application to help and teach other nurses. My nursing career is the one thing that enabled me to be financially independent, and I want to be part of the efforts of nursing education that other women have access to for their financial independence. For women, financial independence can mean safety. I want to be part of empowering other women on their nursing journey and part of their education. When I first started my journey with Maryville University, the orientation video I watched had two professors talking about time management and using a crock pot. I thought, wow, they really understand what women are responsible for while improving their own knowledge and opportunities. Many times I've used a crock pot over these years, and I have never once regretted my decision to take this journey within Maryville's program. Thank you for the education and guidance I received from all the Maryville professors and the opportunity I was given to complete this program. Please see the next few slides for references. Thank you.